Hello. Today I'd like to talk to folks about something that's I see it come up a lot recently where it's one of those things where a lot of people are commenting on how expensive it is for saltwater aquariums and that sort of thing. And, constantly saying, oh, it's so much more expensive than fresh and all these sorts of things. And while I agree that as a whole, it's definitely more expensive, when you're looking at the different ranges of the cost of different fish that go into saltwater aquariums versus, say, freshwater fish or something like that. You're not going to find the wide variety of $2 to $6 fish like you do with freshwater. But what I find really funny is that a lot of the costs and expense and that sort of thing with freshwater tanks and saltwater tanks, when you're taking a look at the different size setups, as well as what you are stocking it with, there's a huge variance there. And so I would say, realistically, the expense of saltwater depends greatly on what sort of freshwater fish that you're looking at keeping or whatever it might be. So, for example, if you're looking at like cichlids, guppies, corycats, plecos, mollies, any of these, low cost fish that you can get for freshwater, then yeah, I mean, saltwater is definitely going to be a significant higher investment than something like that. If, on the other hand, you're a person who's looking at, some of the more custom varieties of koi, flower horns, discus, or other fish that are kind of in that class and in that range, then, once you reach that point, you're on basically on par with a lot of the more a little bit of the lower end of the saltwater fish, but there's a pretty wide variety and a selection in there as well. For example, I'll go ahead and give you a breakdown of the cost of my 90-gallon saltwater tank. So my most expensive fish in there is a one-spot foxface. I paid $45 for it from my local fish store, and he's my most expensive fish that I have in my tank, which is about on par with a lot of discus, a $45 fish. So then you have my Coral Beauty Dwarf Angel, which is a $35 fish, as is my Blue Star Leopard Wrasse, another $35 fish there. So both of those are about on par with some of the, varieties of flower horn that are out there. $30 fish for a Melanaris wrasse. You're looking at a basic arowana and definitely cheaper than some of the more exotic varieties of arowana. You're also looking at other fish that I have, like a $25 Anthias, which is right there with a basic flower horn. And then I have my pajama cardinal fish, which is actually a captive bred from ORA, which is $20. And that's kind of, less expensive than some of those half moon betas that are out there. So realistically, the total cost of the fish stock in my tank is about $190, which, once again, if you're talking about a cichlid tank, if you're talking about, the cheaper end of the hobby for freshwater fish and those more run-of-the-mill freshwater fish, then yeah, it's definitely expensive by those standards. If, however, as I said, you're looking at a person with a heavily planted discus tank or something like that, or some of the more exotic varieties of arowanas, of flower horns, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you can actually, there's a pretty decent variety of saltwater fish. And what I've found actually is that there are quite a few, at least stateside here where I live in the U.S., there are quite a few saltwater fish in the $25 to $35 range if you can get out of the mindset of, oh, there's nothing out there besides tangs. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a Tang enthusiast. Having owned my yellow Tang and the jerk that he was, I don't miss him. But if you can get beyond that and to take a look at the wider varieties out there, there are a whole bunch of gobies, there are blennies, wrasses, the fairy wrasses, the Melanaris, like I have Christmas wrasse, Richmond's wrasse, and a wide variety of fish that fit in that $25 to $35 range. Anthias, and just there's quite a few of them actually, surprisingly, that fit into that range. That are they're gorgeous fish, wonderful personalities, and I may offend some folks on the freshwater side of things, but I'm going to come out and say it. One of the things, in addition to the color and activity that you get with a saltwater tank, is as a whole, saltwater fish have much more unique individual personalities. Now, I'm not saying you can't get some interesting and unique individual personalities in freshwater fish. You can. There are some interesting, blood parrots, and, even betas can have some interesting personalities, pea puffers. And, there are several other kinds of fish out there that have interesting personalities. But in terms of having those interesting, just pure individualized personality quirks, saltwater fish have a massive edge on freshwater there. So if you're looking for those more unique individual personalities, you're going to be able to see that a lot more with saltwater fish than you will with freshwater. My tetras that I have in my tank, they have a couple of little quirks and everything, but there's no comparison between them and my wrasses, Anthias, my one spot foxface, and even my coral beauty dwarf angel. They just have much more unique individual personalities and activities, and just kind of fun to watch. So anyway, these are some of the things to look at when you're looking at, doing the comparison. And of course, there's the scale factor. People a lot of times, unfortunately, with saltwater, they get the, tangs and angels mindset. And so, yeah, they take a look at the cost of this massive 6 to 8 foot long tank so they can keep a variety of these fish, and the cost of adding a wide variety of different corals to it. And yeah, they get sticker shock because you're talking $2 to $3 grand, and it's very expensive. And so I understand why a person would get turned off by that. But on the other hand, there are people who are perfectly content having, say, a 20-gallon tank with a couple of clownfish, and maybe they don't really need coral, which you can set up for, $300 or so. If, and that includes test kits and all the other various accessory items in that figure. So anyways, when you take a look at that, there's a lot of the different scales, that, in my opinion, the 20-gallon fish-only tank with a couple of clownfish in it would be the equivalent of, say, having a beta fish tank in freshwater. Now, although I admit that the beta fish tank is quite a bit cheaper, usually with all accessories costs about $100 to set up something like that. By the time you factor in test kit, gravel, and all the other odds and ends accessories items that you put in the beta tank, as well as the 5 to 10 gallon tank that you to provide a good home for it. But you're going to see a lot more unique behavior and a bit stuff that's a bit more exotic from the clownfish than you're going to see from the beta. So as far as that's concerned, that's kind of that scale thing that I was talking about, and figuring out where you're at on the scale and what you want to do. Fish only is obviously cheaper and easier. There's no honestly, you can use a freshwater light bar for a fish only tank in saltwater and be perfectly fine. You don't need to buy an extra light or anything like that. So it'd be a lot easier to convert over. And then, of course, it's less demanding for water parameters and that sort of thing because corals can be pretty picky about that depending on which type you go with. Um, so, anyways, it's just one of those things where, as I said, I get frustrated, because you go on forums and groups and people ask about saltwater, and you see all these people coming in droves and just saying, "Don't do it. It's so expensive. It's so much harder. It's this. It's that. It's whatever." And realistically, the people who are saying these things, they have about that much saltwater experience. Okay, so for me, it's a lot of bad information and ignorance that I would like to get cleared up, because I think there are a lot of people who could go saltwater but are sometimes put off of it by people who, quite frankly, are ignorant to it. Um, and so, it's one of those things where it's a matter of figuring what fits your size, your budget, and deciding, what sort of things you'd be interested in. Some of the most underrated fish in the hobby are wrasses. I love them dearly. I have two of them. I have my Melanaris and my blue star leopard, and there are many more I'd love to have, such as, the Lubbock's fairy wrasse and other such fish. And these are all fairly affordable fish when you take a look at, they're all within the range of some of the more exotic, half moon beta varieties that are out there. In terms of cost. And so I would say that, there are a lot of people who could afford a saltwater tank, particularly, if you're somebody who maintains like multiple planted tanks, care-wise, maintenance-wise, you can afford a fish-only saltwater tank in the 20 to 40-gallon range, okay? And there's a pretty decent variety of fish that you can have that are spendy by, once again, those cheap freshwater fish standards, but not necessarily, ridiculous cost prohibitive, like a $50 to $100 fish. You don't have to spend that much. Once again, for those of you who are here in the U.S. Obviously, my apologies to those of you who live in Canada and Britain. You guys get hosed when it comes to the hobby. The cost that, you have to pay for things there is ridiculous. So my apologies. But I can only speak to the folks who are stateside here, just because that's the market I'm most familiar with. But anyway, so as far as the hobby goes, it's just one of those things where, you have to take a look at it from a scale and perspective thing, where, yeah, you cannot compare a saltwater tank, even with clownfish, gobies, blennies, cardinal fish, the more cheaper saltwater fish that are out there, or even wrasses and anthias with, guppies and whatever. It's just, it's kind of comparing apples and oranges. And so you need to take a look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm not looking at a saltwater tank cost perspective, from the cost perspective of guppies, cory cats, cichlids, or whatever. I'm looking at it from saltwater by comparing it to, say, discus, flower horns, arowanas, these kinds of fish. And if you're doing it from that perspective, then it's not that bad. So, as I said, it's all a matter of perspective in terms of the cost, and it's just kind of giving a rundown there of some of the costs of things. And that's all I've got, and thanks for watching.